I'm not ashamed to hold my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
We are in Revelation chapter 12 this morning. Revelation chapter 12. We are now officially into the second half of the book of Revelation. I looked online, this is week 34. That does not mean we're going to have 68 weeks of Revelation, but because do remember the first 3 chapters took us, I think, about 12 or 13 weeks to go through. So we were going through a lot slower for the first 3 chapters than we have for the last little bit. But this is going to be the section of the book that has a lot of material that is misinterpreted by many in the religious world today. We have had symbolic and figurative language all the way up through this book. But when it comes to what people want to know, what is the sign of the beast? That's in the second half of this book. People want to insert the Antichrist, who is not in the book of Revelation, but they want to insert the Antichrist into the book of Revelation, and they would do so in the second half of this book. The premillennial kingdom that people believe is coming, teach from the last half of this book. The Battle of Armageddon, you wonder where that comes from, last half of this book. All these are the visions that we're seeing, but we always need to remember the first verse of the book. These are things which must shortly come to pass. And so if these are things which must shortly come to pass, John wrote this book. And so since John wrote this book to 7 churches in Turkey in the 1st century, that means for them shortly would come to pass means it was pertaining to events that would be shortly in their future. 2,000 years later, it's not shortly anymore, and it is not in our future. We might be able to draw some comparisons maybe to persecution, learn lessons about how we can overcome persecution through Christ, how ultimately the church will be victorious over Satan and over persecution. But the events that occur in this book are not in our future. We can just learn the lessons that those churches learned. And so we are in Revelation 12. We're going to read the first 6 verses, and we're going to have the appearance of the woman and the appearance of the great dragon. Let's read one slide each. We'll start with Gord. Revelation 12, verses 1 to 6.
And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth.
And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it.
She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nursed for 1,260 days.
All right, so we have a sign or a great wonder, depending on the version that you have. A great wonder appeared in the sky. And yeah, this would be a great wonder if this appeared in the sky. We have a woman, and we'll describe her in a second. We have this great dragon. And you want to know why are dragons red? Well, partly because of what we read in this book. As far as dragons were things that the people would be familiar with. Because not only that, because of the imagery that the Bible has for who the dragon is, because we will know who the dragon is. because he will be identified. But dragons, we find in cultural references, even to this day. We understand, all right, what dragons are. But these are two great signs that appeared. Two great signs. And the first question we have is, describe the woman of Revelation chapter 12. Just describe her. We're not going to. We will discuss what those mean. We're just describing her right now.
She's clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet. She has a garland of 12 stars on her head, and she's with child.
She's with child. Okay, so we have. She is clothed with the sun. How would you describe that clothing then? If you were clothed with the sun. Radiant. Bright, shining. Like I said, we can't look up at the sun, it's so bright. She's not in sackcloth and ashes like those two witnesses we read of in chapter 11. No, she is clothed with the sun. She has the moon under her feet, and she has a crown, or what did you say, garland? Garland or a crown of 12 stars. Jeff already answered question 2, but why did the woman cry in pain?
She's with child.
She's with child. She had birth pains. Cried out with birth pains and the agony of giving birth. I don't know what that feels like. I don't. But there are women in this room who have had children who do understand what that feels like. She travailed, or she gave birth. I'm not talking about a specific name, but who did she give birth to according to verse 5?
Boy child.
Pardon me,
A boy.
a boy child or a man child? And this child would what? According to verse 5.
To rule all nations.
Rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And thinking about that, when we get to, in a moment, identifying who this woman is, we have to think about who her child is, okay? So he would rule all the nations with a rod of iron. What would happen to this son, though?
Caught up to God.
He'd be caught up to God and his throne. And so we have this woman. She is clothed with the sun, the moon, and the stars. She has given birth to a man-child who would rule all nations with a rod of iron. But her son would be caught up to God and to his throne. What happened then to the woman? We've skipped the dragon. We'll come back to the dragon in a little bit. But what happened to the woman after that?
She fled in the wilderness, prepared by God so that she would be nourished for 1,160 days.
Okay, so she fled to the wilderness. That's often when we read of scriptures, where people when they are in trouble, where are they fleeing to? Well, we're usually in Israel. Elijah, when he was in trouble, where did he go? He went to the wilderness. Outside of Israel, if you don't know, there's different wildernesses. When we read in Genesis, when we're doing our podcast study in Genesis, we find that Hagar fled to one of the wildernesses. I think it's the wilderness of Shur. There's the wilderness of Beersheba. There's the wildernesses on the west coast of Saudi Arabia. They all have different names in the scriptures, but it's the wilderness. You're fleeing away from where the people are. You're going into solitude. And you're doing that to escape trouble. But, as Kala had said, was she abandoned by God in the wilderness? No, she was not abandoned by God. She was nourished by God for how long again?
1,260 days.
All right, that number doesn't mean a lot to us, but
42 months.
42 months,
3.5
3.5 years. There's our number. Numbers don't mean literal, they're not meant as literal numbers. They usually represent something. 1,260 doesn't sound like 1,000, doesn't sound like 7, doesn't sound like 10, doesn't sound like any of that. But when you break it down, assume 30 months or 30 days a month, that comes out to 42 months. Well, 42 months again doesn't sound like 10, 7, or anything like that we know. But again, now divide that into years. There are 12 months in 1 year, so 36 months in 3 years, 6 months in half a year, so that's 3.5 years. Well, now we have a number. 3.5 is half of 7. 7 is a complete number, so 3.5 is complete. So it's not a complete or definite or full period of time. So in other words, what it's saying is the woman is not going to remain in the wilderness forever. That's what we need to take away from that, is that she is fleeing to the wilderness, but she is not going to be banished there forever. She is going to be able to return. And so that's what we have. Now we have this question, though, and it was a question I told you to consider at the end of last week's class. Who is the woman? And there are 4 possibilities that we will look at and then discuss which is probably the best of those 4 possibilities as to who the woman is, because she is not directly identified here. We know she represents something, and we can discern what that something is, but what are some possibilities, do you think, that this woman could be?
Israel.
All right, we have Israel, the nation of Israel. Okay, so that's one possibility. We'll discuss them once we can see if we can get all 4 of them out. So we have the nation of Israel. Jeff.
I'd say God's people in general, however they're identified. The children have come from Abraham, whether it would be physical Israel or spiritual.
Okay, so we might identify that as the church in the New Testament, God's people. God's people. So that's 2. We have 2. You actually got the 2 that were maybe a little harder to see on the page. But maybe they're not as hard as I think they are. There's one that might stick out as maybe a little obvious. Think about what time of the year this is. Mary. Some people might say, is this Mary? Because, of course, she's giving birth to a son. All right, we know who that is. All right, that's 3rd possibility. The 4th possibility that is a little bit more what I call philosophical. Think about how she is clothed. She's clothed with what again? Her entire appearance. Sun, moon, and stars. How many different things are mentioned? 3. How many Bible ages are there? Typically. There's typically 3. And so what I'm talking about philosophical is someone would come along and say, well, the patriarchal age, the Mosaical age, and Christ's age. And the way they discern that, the patriarchal age is the starlit age. When we take a look at the stars, how bright are the stars? They're bright, but they're not like the sun or the moon. Well, God spoke to different people. He didn't speak to mankind on the whole. He spoke to different people. He spoke to Noah. He spoke to Enoch. He spoke to Abraham. But he didn't speak just to everyone. Then we have the moonlit age. Who did God speak to under Moses? Moses and children of Israel through the law of Moses. So we have now we have God's people represented in the moonlit age, but again, that's not all of mankind. And then we have Christ. Who does God speak to under this age? He speaks through Christ to? No, to, not through. Who does he speak to?
However,
Everyone. He speaks to everyone. The sunlit age. In other words, we started with a plan that was very mysterious. We could only, like, as far as we couldn't really see God's plan. It was a prophecy to Eve, little prophecy to Abraham, stars. Moses, okay, little bit more light, and then Christ is all the light. I'm saying these are possibilities. I'm just trying to explain how someone might come up with that. So we have these 4 possibilities. That the woman is a representation of the light of the 3 biblical ages. That the woman represents the Jewish nation. The woman represents the church. Or the woman represents the Virgin Mary. Before we discuss it, I think I have Bill and Jeff, so we'll start with Jeff.
well, that last one would still make the woman herself God's people of every age.
Yeah.
They're the only ones that have received what God has said, whether it was through the patriarchs or through the law of Moses or through Christ.
Yeah. And that's where we're going to be going with that. Yeah, that's exactly right. Bill.
What about the daughter of Zion? Micah 4 and 10, that all seems to kind of... Oh, sorry.
There you go. That's what we're going to combine. That's good. I'm glad you looked ahead. I'm glad when people look ahead. But no, we have the that would be the spiritual remnant. So those are the 4 that people have, and really, I said there were 4. There's the 5th one that probably is the best one, because let's think about it this way. If it was literal Israel, did Israel on the whole accept Christ? No. The nation of Israel on the whole, the physical nation of Israel, rejected Christ. And so that really doesn't fit into Revelation chapter 12 as the woman rejecting Christ. Like as far as the woman, doesn't say in Revelation 12 that the woman rejected her son or went out into the wilderness in rebellion. She went out into the wilderness to escape this dragon. Israel rejected Christ on the whole. And so that really doesn't fit if it's just the Jewish nation. The church, people say, well, it could be the church. The church is never the product of Christ. That's right, the church is the product of Christ, not vice versa. In other words, if the woman is the church, who's the son? The church didn't give birth to Christ. And so it really doesn't fit that Revelation chapter 12 that the woman is the church. If it's the Virgin Mary, Christians are never called the offspring or the seed of Mary. And what I was saying, what I had to skip to get to Micah was Revelation 12:17. Then the dragon became furious when the woman went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, and he stood on the sand of the sea. So if the woman is simply the Virgin Mary, we're never called the offspring of Mary. That's never how the church is described in the New Testament. So, for that to be the woman, for Mary to be the woman, doesn't again fit with the context. And so, going back to what Bill was saying, really is, what we're really going to do is we're really going to combine 2 of them. And we're going to see that in the Old Testament, this would be described as the spiritual remnant of God's people. Because let's remember how the churches of that time would have read this. They would have had most of the New Testament, but they would have had the Old Testament to look to. And a lot of Revelation is drawing from what we read of in the Old Testament. That's where some of these figures come in. That's why some of these figures are what they are. Let's get Micah chapter 4. Where to, Lisa? Micah chapter 4, verse 10.
Rise and run, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. For now you shall go out from the city and dwell in the open country. You shall go to Babylon. There you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies.
In Micah chapter 4, what is the physical context Who is Micah talking to?
Israel.
He's talking to Israel, specifically
Is it the
Judah. You're going to go into Babylon. Micah, I looked this up and I forgot when Micah was prophesying, but this is talking about Babylon. You're going to go into Babylon, but you will return. Okay, that's a physical prophecy. You're going to go, but we know our remnant will return. Well, if we take this and make it a symbolic, we get a very similar picture in Revelation chapter 12. The woman, the daughter of Zion, she's like a woman in labor. You will go out from the city and dwell in the open country. Well, the open country, the wilderness. But you will be rescued and you will be redeemed. And so we get this idea, there's a slight variation of the three dispensations and the Jewish nation, but it goes to what Jeff was saying. It's the spiritual remnant of all God's people. This is probably the least speculative that we can have out of our representations. So the man-child was brought forth of the remnant of the daughter of Zion. He was who? Who was the son?
Would that be Christ?
That would be Christ. Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Annette.
But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient days.
So the man-child who is brought forth, the remnant of the daughter of Zion, that's the physical, like as far as we know that to be the physical remnant, that was Christ. That was the Messiah. The remnant of her seed in Revelation 12:17. We go back to Revelation 12:17. Maybe I put it over here. Oh, good, I did. Who are the remnant of the woman's seed that come from the wilderness? What does the verse say? Those who what?
Keep the commandments
Those who keep the commandments
of God and hold to the
and
testimony.
hold to the testimony of Jesus Christ. Those could be Jews or Gentiles. That's why it's a spiritual remnant of, that's why it's the spiritual remnant. Those, whether they are Jew or whether they are Gentile. Let's get a couple verses on that. Sandra, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 15.
Therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since the death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant.
All right, so we have a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised inheritance. Now we think, well, that's the Jews. Well, that could include some of the Jews, but that's not all who were called. Hebrews chapter 11, we'll come over to Shidon. Hebrews 11:40.
Since God has provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect.
And then we'll get Shligan, Galatians 3:27-29.
For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have been put on Christ. There's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, there's neither male nor female, for you are all in one Christ Jesus. And if you're Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring. You're according to the promise.
All right, so we have all of that. Christ died so that the sins committed under the first covenant can now be forgiven. But anyone who is called, whether they're Jews or Gentiles, whether they're men or women, whether they are slaves or whether they're free, they can be one in Christ Jesus. And it's important to understand, if we are Christ, who are we?
Abraham's seed.
Abraham's seed. That's interesting. Are we physically Abraham's seed? No. we're spiritually part of Abraham's seed. That gives us a new meaning as to what God was promising to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 12, 15, and 17. When he said, through your seed all the nations of the world would be blessed. Israel took that to mean that it was through Israel that all the nations of the world would be blessed. Galatians makes the point, it's not through seeds as of many, it is through seed as of one. That seed is Christ. It is through Christ that all the nations of the world would be blessed. Abraham's seed was not Judah. It was not David. It was Jesus. It was through Jesus all the nations. Now, all the nations of the world would not physically come to Christ by becoming Jews. That's what first century Christians had to fight, was this idea that, okay, well, we'll accept Gentiles into the church, but you have to become a Jew first. You can't be a Gentile, you have to be a Jew. Because, after all, you have to be part of Abraham's seed. Thinking on the physical terms. No, as many of you as have been baptized into Christ, have put on Christ, and if you are Christ, then are you Abraham's seed. You are spiritually circumcised, your sins are cut away from your spirit, and you are now under the full covenant of God, under His promises, which one of them is a full inheritance. Full inheritance. You are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. And so when we get to this woman in Revelation chapter 12, we can sort of think of this woman as a spiritual remnant of God's people, representing the spiritual remnant of God's people. I believe that's the least speculative of them all. Are there any comments before we move on to the dragon? Who the dragon is? Cal?
I was just thinking that since these things were shortly to come, there's so many things he's seeking.
Yeah.
Way in the beginning, how it originated, like that's a lot. The whole picture is there for him to see.
Yeah. This is an interesting picture. This Hollywood movie makers couldn't make a movie like this. We go to the movies all the time. We see great things and very amazing things in the movie theaters. Hollywood can't make a movie like this. This is a spectacular scene that he has seen. And not only, like as far as it's representing things that would actually happen. This is not a fictional play that he is presenting to us as things, well, this is what, yes, they're representations of things that would shortly to come to pass. But they are representing things that would come to pass. And so that's what we do need to keep in mind. But it is a spectacular picture. Anything else? Before we move on to the dragon. Well, we have this second wonder we've skipped all the way through. And it's the dragon in verse 3 of chapter 12 of Revelation. Describe the red dragon. Well, describe the dragon. Sorry. Describe the dragon.
It's pretty ominous that he was large, great.
He was large and great. I already said red. What else did he have?
7 heads.
7 heads. Okay, there's that number again. Number 7. What does 7 represent? Complete and perfect. So, the dragon is not the partial head of evil. This is the head of evil. This is the one who is in complete, direct opposition to the Messiah and to Christians. So who is that?
Devil.
The devil is the one. And frankly speaking, the devil is described this way in other places than Revelation. We'll come up to David, John 8, verse 44. Are you able to read?
Oh, me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and has nothing to do with the truth, because there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies.
So in this verse, Jesus is speaking here in this verse, and he's describing Israel as being the father of the devil. Because, why?
Lies.
They lies they're telling. You're doing your father's desires. You're lying about me. You're coming along and saying, I'm casting out demons by the power of the devil. You are saying I'm blaspheming God. You are denying the power that I am showing. Denying the words that you are of your father, the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning. What does that mean? How is he a murderer? I don't read of that in Genesis, specifically. I do, but how is he a murderer, Jeff?
Lies. Lies. He used that basically to kill by convincing others to sin against God.
Eve in the garden, you shall not die. That was the lie he told. He killed, spiritually, Adam and Eve. He killed them. They had not died before. He physically killed them too in one sense because access to the tree of life was taken away. We die because of that. We don't have access to that tree. And so he killed physically. Spiritually, he killed through his lies. So he is a murderer from the beginning. And when he lies, he speaks of his own character. He's not putting on a front. This is who he is. He is a liar and the father of lies. So we have that picture of the devil. 1 John chapter 3 also gives us another picture, and we'll come over to Henry. 1 John chapter 3, verse 10.
By this is evident who are the children of God, and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not allow his blood.
All right, we can know whether we're the children of God or the children of the devil by whether or not we practice righteousness. If we practice righteousness, that means we're going to do exactly what God tells us to do. If we do that, we're the children of God. If we do not do that, we are the children of the devil. The one who does not practice righteousness, the one who does not love his brother, the children of the devil. The devil is the one, the father of sin, the father of evil. And so, that's why it's 7 heads. He also has how many horns? 10 horns. 10 is what number? In Revelation, what's it represent? Also completion. Another number. In other words, what would you use? What does an animal use horns to do? Pardon me? Attack, defend itself. It's a power. It's a symbol of power. And so when the picture is 10 horns, he is completely powerful. We must not mistake just how powerful the devil is. Yes, God is more powerful. He is not as powerful as God. But he is not a weak person sitting off in the corner. He is strong. 1 Peter chapter 5, we'll come up to Tim. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8.
Be sober-minded, be watchful. Be adversary, the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour.
So, here the devil is described as a roaring lion. I don't go into fields with lions that, when I go see a lion, it's usually, it's always been in the zoo. There's a cage, there's bars between me and the lion. I'm not in the field. I'm not the zookeeper going to feed the lion. I'm not going to, if I go out to Africa and see them in the wild, I'm not going out and just walking among the wild lions. Because I respect their power. I respect the danger. Well, some people don't think about that when it comes to the devil. They treat the devil as, he's just an annoyance if you believe in him at all. Just an annoyance. I really don't have to pay that much attention to him. No. He tempts us to sin. He is powerful. And we must not underestimate his power, Bill.
And just kind of what you said there, if somebody tells me I can be easily conned, like I take offense to that. I'm not stupid, I'm smart. But yet here we see the devil described with 7 heads. Like that, to me, I'm thinking intelligence.
Yes.
He's not easily fooled.
No.
But when we put that into comparison with him and then myself,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The devil is the complete picture of evil here. And he will be for the rest of this book. He is crowned with what?
7.
How many?
7.
7 crowns. He is the absolute ruler of evil. This is the picture we have of the devil. This is not going to be some man. This is not going to be just a minor character. No, the dragon is the devil. The dragon is the devil. What does he do? What does he do with his tail? When did we get that? Yeah, we did. In verse 4. What did he do?
That's the kind of picture he draws in 1/3 of the stars of heaven.
And casts them to the earth. Again, this is a symbolic language. This really happened. That would be catastrophic. But with his tail he grabbed and cast 1/3 of the stars of heaven into the earth. The devil is powerful. He is cunning. And he is wrathful. Very angry. Like you don't do this if you're going out and wanting to have a good day. The devil has never done anything that has been in man's interest. He has always been against us, and he has sought to hurt those who would serve God. Just read Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 5 on your own time. We're not going to have time today. But read those 5 verses and tell me if the devil is our friend. Because he is not. He has never done a good thing for us. He always has his interests in mind, never ours. This is the picture of the person that is in this chapter. And he is going to, next week, the Lord willing, then we'll finish up with this section. He is going to stand ready to devour the woman's child as soon as this child was born. That's an interesting picture. Think about, over the next week, think about how in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the devil tried to do that. Because the devil was at work while Jesus was here on this earth. Tried to get Jesus to fail. He didn't succeed, but he tried.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to